Hello ladies and gents, welcome. It's finally here. This is video 5 of Bannockburn Month, and today we are going to at last look at the first day of the battle. On this day, 705 years ago, the Battle of Bannockburn began, and on the morning of the 23rd of June 1314, the English were down in Falkirk. They set out towards Stirling. The day before, the 22nd of June, they had been marching from Edinburgh to Falkirk, and during the day they received intelligence that the Scots had pulled back from the Torwood, where they'd been training for the last 6 weeks or so. They'd pulled back from the Torwood into the New Park. Now for the English, remember, this would seem to confirm their suspicions, even their anxieties, that the Scots really are not up for a fight here in June 1314, that they are going to try to flee altogether, just as they have done on previous occasions. They are actually determined, as far as the English are concerned, to avoid giving them battle, which is what the English want. However, as we looked at the other day, this is not Bruce preparing to run. This is Bruce pulling his men back behind the pits and traps that he's created, behind this artificial bottleneck that the Scots have created in order to carry out Bruce's plan, in order to force the English into the area where they really want to take them on. But the English don't know this. The English don't know about these pits and traps. And so when the English vanguard arrives just south of the Bannockburn and sees the Scots, or some Scots at least, milling around at the mouth of the New Park, just on the northern side of the Bannockburn, remember, the English think, aha, we've got them. They were trying to run away, they were trying to retreat and keep out of our way, but they haven't gone fast enough, and now we've got them. And so, quite understandably, this English vanguard races down that road, crosses the Bannockburn, and tries to hit the Scots head on. But as soon as they get across the burn, this is where they discover those pits and traps. Now those pits and traps don't, or probably don't, do that much damage. They are probably not that lethal to this mounted English vanguard. Remember, this is all heavy cavalry, knights and men-at-arms, led jointly by the Earl of Gloucester, Gilbert de Clare, and Humphrey de Bohun, the Earl of Hereford. So they cross the Bannockburn, they find these traps, but the traps probably don't kill that many men. The traps, remember, are not really designed as anti-personnel devices, I suppose you would call them. They are simply there to create this bottleneck, to funnel the English into this narrow space so that they can only hit the Scots in a column. They can't fan out and overwhelm the Scots. They have to hit the Scots head on a little narrow front. Nevertheless, that is still what the English do, because these are knights, these are men-at-arms, these are men who have been trained from a very young age to fight as heavy cavalry, and to think that when faced by heavy cavalry, that tenant farmers and peasants will just run. And that is predominantly what they are facing in this Scottish division that they meet at the mouth of the New Park. These are mostly tenants of the King of Scots or his supporters. These are not professional soldiers, or at least the closest thing that the medieval period has to professional soldiers, as I say, knights, sergeants, men-at-arms, that sort of thing. However, despite the English thinking this, Bruce's 6 weeks training his men in the Torwood pays off, and his men do not break, they don't flee, they don't run, they don't turn tail, they don't melt away like the English think they are going to. They stand their ground, fighting in a tightly packed spear formation, a schiltron, designed to turn aside heavy cavalry. These men fighting with long spears that are killing horses, killing men, bumping men off their horses, and one of the men who comes off his horse there at the mouth of the New Park is none other than Gilbert de Clare, the Earl of Gloucester. We looked at him in a previous video. Now, it's a very embarrassing thing for a knight and a nobleman to be bumped off his horse. It's embarrassing when another knight does it to you, but when it's just some tenant farmer, when it's just some nobody with a long stick, well, that's really very embarrassing. And remember, there had already been a row in the English army about who should be in command of the vanguard. Edward had made this very weak compromise and made both Gloucester and Hereford the commanders. That, of course, leaves the English vanguard a very confusing place, especially if you don't belong to the sort of personal retinue of Hereford and Gloucester. This confusing command structure makes it very difficult for this to fight as one unified force against this Scottish army. Not that that would probably make too big of a difference given the way that the Scots are fighting here at Bannockburn. But now, having made such a fuss of how important he was, how deserving he was of this high honour of leading the English vanguard, Gloucester has now embarrassingly been bumped off his horse and is walking back with the rest of the English vanguard to the Bannockburn, back the way they came when they can't get through the Scottish army. Now that's worth bearing in mind, folks, for tomorrow, because that, I think, is going to help us understand some of Gloucester's actions on the second day of battle. Now, also in the midst of the fighting here at the mouth of the New Park, there is a face-off, it seems, of a sort between Robert Bruce, the King of Scots, and Sir Henry de Bohun, who is Humphrey de Bohun, the Earl of Hereford's, probably his nephew. Relatively young, probably only in his 20s, maybe even a little bit younger than that. Bruce, on the other hand, is pushing 40 in 1314, but despite that, despite maybe being almost twice Henry de Bohun's age, Robert Bruce kills Henry de Bohun, is personally responsible for killing this young, healthy, vigorous, energetic knight. Now, the details of how this happens, I would suggest, are not necessarily all that important. There's various different versions that people like to argue about. The earliest version we have has Henry scouting the New Park for the English, seeing the Scots and trying to pull back, and Bruce wickedly chasing him down and killing him. His squire gets killed trying to defend Henry's body, according to that early account, the Vita Edwardi Secundi, the life of Edward II. Later on in the 1360s, we have the Scala Chronica, an account by Sir Thomas Grey, whose father had fought at Bannockburn, although not at the mouth of the New Park. He gives the impression, really, that it's just in the midst of this fighting at the mouth of the New Park that Bruce and de Bohun are kind of swept together, and they fight, and that Bruce kills him. The most dramatic, but also the latest account we have comes from my boy John Barber, who has Bruce reviewing his troops before the fighting actually starts. Henry spotting Bruce and charging literally full tilt as if he was jousting against Bruce, hoping that if he can kill King Robert before the fighting starts, there won't actually be any fighting, there won't be a battle, he can just end the battle before it's even started. Bruce, seeing de Bohun, performs essentially what is a little cheat that probably a lot of jousters know. Certainly we see it in other sources with accusations being made that certain individuals have used this in jousts. Essentially what Bruce does is he charges towards de Bohun as if he were engaging in an honest tilt, but just at the last moment just pulls his horse to the side so that de Bohun passes him on the right side as opposed to the left side, so that de Bohun's spear misses King Robert, at which point Robert uses the momentum of his own horse, plus the momentum of Henry's horse, plus the momentum of the swing of his axe, to split de Bohun's skull in half, shattering the axe shaft with the force of this impact. I am no scientist, but even I can tell that the physics of that is a little bit dubious, quite honestly. But it is certainly the most exciting, the most dramatic of the accounts. But the details really don't matter. The important thing, the significance of the face-off between Bruce and de Boon, and we do have multiple attestations of it, so it's not unreasonable to suggest that it did in fact take place. But its significance is that here we have the middle-aged, recently ill, perhaps, King of Scots, killing in single combat, it seems, a young, energetic, vigorous knight, a knight perhaps only half his age. Now imagine how that looks to the Scots. Imagine how that story spreads through the camp. Remember, Bruce, towards the end of 1313 and even in early 1314, had himself been personally very quiet. He seems to have been possibly making plans for what happens in the event of his death at the end of 1313. But now the king has personally slain, as I say, a young, energetic knight. This king who has had them down in the New Park, these Scots, in the Torwood rather, for the last 6 weeks or so, training them, telling them, look, listen to me, remember your training. I know it's scary facing down these big, heavy English cavalry charges, but if you remember your training, if you stick together, if you remember what we've been doing here for the last 6 weeks, we can win, we can turn them back, we can beat them. Bruce killing Sir Henry must feel like a vindication of all of that. It must hugely increase the faith these men have in this plan that Bruce has been trying to drum into them for the last 6 weeks. Now imagine what it must do to the English. Imagine that story spreading through the English camp after the first day of battle. The English, remember, were under the impression, it seems, that Bruce was on his last legs. As I mentioned, it looked like towards the end of the previous year he'd been forced to make plans for his eventual death. This may very well have inspired the English to think that 1314 was their year to right the wrongs of the last 7 years. That Bruce was on his way out, and now is their chance to put a final nail in Bruce's coffin. And now that king has proven not just to be fighting fit, but to be quite capable of physically overcoming someone much younger than him, probably much fitter than him. This can only damage morale in the English army. There must be plenty of men in that English army now wondering why exactly they are fighting in this legally dubious army that Edward has put together, quite in spite of agreements he had made to the contrary back in 1311. That, ladies and gents, is the significance of the face-off between Bruce and de Boon. It is a huge boost to Scottish morale on the first day of battle at a crucial moment, and a huge blow to English morale. And that really, I think, is why the story kind of looms so large in the popular consciousness about Bannockburn as well, because it comes kind of to symbolise the battle as a whole. So, English try to barrel through the Scots in the New Park, can't, have to pull back. Meanwhile, there is a flanking manoeuvre of some sort attempted by another group of English cavalry. Again, the leadership of this force is a little bit unclear. Might be led by Sir Robert Clifford, a baron from Northern England who had made quite a career for himself as a soldier in the Scottish Wars. Maybe led by Sir Henry Beaumont. He is the titular Earl of Buchan. He's married to a common and through her has a claim on the earldom of Buchan. That's in the northeast of Scotland. That's very much what he's fighting for here at Bannockburn, and indeed what he continues to fight for right the way through to his death in the early 1340s. It might be that it's again commanded by both of them. There may have been another weak attempted compromise by Edward II. So again, this force may not really entirely know who it's following or exactly what it's doing. And indeed, we are not really sure what exactly it's doing. There's some uncertainty in the sources. over exactly what the point of this manoeuvre is. It may be that the English are trying to send this cavalry round to block off Bruce's possible escape route. Remember, the English are quite anxious here at Bannockburn on the first day about the prospect of Bruce slipping away before they can bring him to battle. It may be that they're trying to get to the castle for some reason, maybe to try and gather intelligence from the garrison. It may be actually that they are just trying to gather intelligence generally, that they are conducting reconnaissance in strength, as it were. But either way, this cavalry force is again stopped in its tracks and driven back, this time by Thomas Randolph, Earl of Murray, King Robert's nephew. Now, there is a later account, again from my boy Barber, that suggests that Randolph, although he is successful in driving the English back, that he is a little bit slow to react, that Bruce had anticipated that this was going to happen and had given Randolph orders to prevent it from happening, and that Randolph reacts quite slowly, lets the English get a little bit further than Bruce was comfortable with, and that this causes some tension between Bruce and Randolph. I think we have to be a little bit careful about that, or a little bit careful when interpreting that. I think Barber there, is writing much more for his own time than for Bruce's. By the 1370s, by the time Barber is writing, the descendants of James Douglas, Archibald the Grim, Douglas's illegitimate son, William I, Earl of Douglas, the good Sir James's nephew, they have both become some of the most significant men in the kingdom, may indeed be paying Barber's way when he's putting the Bruce together, and they are local rivals of the Dunbar Earls of March and Murray, who are descendants of Randolph. So it's possibly a sort of sly dig at some of the Douglases, the contemporary Douglases' rivals, rather than a comment on anything that Randolph got up to on the 23rd of June. So we need to be a little bit careful about that, and either way, Randolph, even Barber admits, Randolph is successful in driving the English back, probably from around St Ninians, which is just a little bit north of the New Park, but again between the New Park itself and Stirling. So, two little skirmishes, not really achieving very much other than demonstrating to the English that they cannot just muscle their way through the middle of the Scots as they would like to. If they are going to get at the Scots, they are going to have to get around these pits and traps that Bruce has dug in front of him, and to do that, as we mentioned yesterday, they are going to have to either go left or they are going to have to go right. If they go left into the west, they have some very difficult ground to get through. Very wet ground and then very high ground. That's going to slow them down, might provoke Bruce to attack them. More than likely, it will provoke Bruce just to go. Remember, that is the big anxiety, the big worry that the English have here at Bannockburn, that at any point Bruce might just decide he's going to nick off and not give them the fight that they want. So, Edward makes the correct decision. He makes the smart decision. He decides he's going to go hard and fast. He's going to go around to the east, to the right. He's going to travel along relatively high ground till the Bannockburn becomes a little bit easier to cross. Down into an area known as the Carse. He crosses the Bannockburn with his army there and then camps his army in an area between the Bannockburn on one side and another shallow, slow-moving stream, the Pell Stream, on the other. In a little V shape, those two streams flow together and then eventually flow further east and go eventually run into the River Forth. Now, camping in that little V shape in the river seems like the smart move at the time. Camping not the river, between the two streams. Camping so close to the two streams between them gives the English access to fresh water. Now that is going to be enormously important for an army that one day marched from Edinburgh to Falkirk, the next day marched from Falkirk to Stirling, or near enough to Stirling, and has also spent the afternoon skirmishing back and forth with the Scots. If the English are going to fight a pitched battle the next day, they need to be as refreshed as humanly possible, and access to those two streams allows them that luxury, affords them that luxury. And again, the English are not thinking about Bruce as a commander who fights pitched battles, who is going to bring the fight to them. At best, they are expecting Bruce to do what he's done on the first day, which is defend the new park, defend that good ground, the dry, firm ground, the best ground to fight on, really, anywhere in the surrounding area. And that's all Bruce has done on the first day of battle. Bruce has done nothing on the first day of battle, although he has frustrated them, although he has turned them back twice. He's done nothing aggressive. He's done nothing to dissuade the English that he is just going to hold on and frustrate them and annoy them as much as humanly possible, and perhaps then slip away before they can actually bring their own numbers, their own strengths to bear against him. So, if that is the case, if Bruce is going to fight defensively here at Bannockburn, then from the Carse, from that area between the two streams, the English have options. They can, on the second day, march up the nice gentle slope of Balkiderick Ridge and attack the Scots from the east, hoping that there are no pits and traps on that side of the new park. That's a much wider, flatter area where the English can spread out, can put some pressure on the Scots, or they can continue to flank him. They can continue around, cross the Pell stream and try to form up north of Bruce's position. If they can do that, they might even have managed to cut him off from his escape route. If Bruce is going to try and escape south, he's escaping back towards enemy territory. That's dangerous for him. So if the English can form up north of Bruce's position, then he either has to try and escape back down towards their territory, or else he's going to have to fight them. And remember, that's what the English want. They want to force Bruce to fight a battle on their terms. So, on the evening of the 23rd of June, while the English have had a frustrating first day, an annoying first day, they could be forgiven for thinking that things were still going their way. They could be forgiven for thinking that while Bruce has lived up to his reputation as this irritating, cunning, crafty guerrilla leader, that tomorrow he's going to get his comeuppance, that tomorrow finally the rebellious Earl of Carrick, King Hob as the English have called him in the past, is going to get his just desserts at the hand of this much bigger English army. Bruce, on the other hand, presumably should also be feeling very, very satisfied with himself, because as we looked at yesterday, his plan, everything has gone according to that plan thus far. The English failed to barrel through him. His men stood together thanks to that training he'd been giving them for the last 6 weeks or so. The traps worked, and more so, they forced the English around in the direction that Bruce wanted them, down into an area that is narrow, that is tight, where if he takes his army down there the following day, he can force them into that narrow space, prevent them from bringing their numbers to bear. Now, there's a famous, oft-repeated story that during the night, a Scot fighting on the English side, Alexander Seton, crosses from the English camp to Bruce's camp, and tells the king what a sorry state the English are in, about the tensions between Edward and his commanders, about the frustrations being felt by the common English soldiers. Now, parts of that story are true. Up to that point, the story, I would say, is true. Alexander Seton does seem to cross over from the English camp to the Scottish camp, bringing with him quite positive, encouraging intelligence for Bruce. But the part of the story that I would tend to dispute is the idea that somehow it is this that inspires Bruce to fight on day 2, to bring his army down into the Carse and put some pressure on the English. I, quite frankly, don't buy that for a moment, because although in the grand scheme of military manoeuvres, what Bruce's army does the following day is quite simple, it is still far too complex to Bruce to decide on the spur of the moment, based on brand new intelligence, that this is what the Scots are going to do. This has always been Bruce's plan. I think everything about the way that he has prepared for this battle has led him to this moment. This is what Bruce has been waiting for, getting the English down between those two streams, in that nice little tight, rather narrow area where he can press them without having to worry too much about their superior numbers. Something has happened down there in the cast that Bruce probably hadn't anticipated, or certainly wasn't counting on to make his plan work, but which is going to benefit him a great deal, as we're going to see tomorrow, and that is as those 20,000 Englishmen and their horses and their carts and all the rest of the paraphernalia that this English army drags behind it, as the English have passed over the Bannockburn, they have churned the ground up on either side of the burn into a quagmire, into a mess. Remember, 20,000 Englishmen. Every one of those Englishmen that is planning to fight on horseback, between 2,000 and 3,000 of them, has at least 3 horses with him, the one that he's going to fight on, the one that he's ridden here on, and at least one to carry all of his gear. The land on either side of the burn will necessarily be a bit wetter than the land around it, because of course it's the water of the burn will soak into the soil around it. So by the time the English have gotten themselves into that area between the two streams, the area that they've come across on either side of the Bannockburn is a muddy mess. It must be a nightmare down there. Now that doesn't seem like a problem to the English, because of course they're not planning to go back that way. They are planning to attack Bruce or try and skirt around him again. They don't think they're going to have to go back that way, maybe for days, maybe not ever. If they can beat Bruce, they can just go back down the road again and not have to worry about those traps anymore if they've scattered Bruce's army. That, however, is going to come back and bite the English in a very, very serious way, as we are going to see tomorrow when we come back and have a look at the second day of the Battle of Bannockburn. So I'm going to leave it there for us now, folks. Apologies if there's anything that you thought I should have said that I've missed. Obviously feel free to leave comments below and so forth. Some stuff that you may be waiting for though, I may be going to mention tomorrow, because we're going to come back tomorrow, I'm going to pick up the story, and we're going to take the Battle of Bannockburn right the way through to the bitter end, or the sweet end I suppose, depending on your perspective. We're going to see what Bruce does on that second day of battle, and how, even if the English can come up with any answer to it. Thank you, ladies and gents. I hope you've enjoyed it.